We live in a time where people will believe almost everything with no evidence, and others will believe almost nothing when there is overwhelming evidence. So as Easter is coming up, I want to take these few days to explain 3 big questions people might have around this time of year. 1. Was Jesus a historical person? 2. Did he really die? And 3. Did he really come back to life or resurrect? And if he did, where is he now? With this video, I just want to show you the evidence that Jesus was a real person. Just so you understand and you're aware of why Easter is such a big deal to our culture, our calendars, and for so many people's lives. That it's not just a holiday season that someone came up with one day that has no historical significance to it. Also, I'm not going to try to make up your mind about who Jesus is, because that's something only you can do, and that's something you will have to decide after hearing the evidence about these 3 questions. I'm just doing this to show you the evidence. Then the decision is yours. So the first thing we need to realize is that Western culture is still so strongly influenced by Jesus. About 1/3 of the world's population claim to follow Jesus and see him as God. That's roughly about 2 billion people right now. Today's views of Jesus can be put into 4 groups, and you'll probably fall into one of them. The first one is the traditional or mainstream view of Jesus. Nearly all Christians from all denominations hold on to this view until today, that Jesus was both man and God, that he died, rose from the dead, and is still alive today. The second group have a skeptical view of Jesus. They reject and don't believe in the miraculous side of Jesus and just see him as a man, maybe even a good man, that after his death was somehow viewed as the Son of God and Saviour. Even though they might respect Jesus or not, there's a massive gap between the first group and this one. They think the evidence of him is flawed and unreliable, something that the first group would disagree on. Then there's the third group. Their Jesus is a mythical figure that was in touch with the spiritual world and is something like the spiritual figures of Eastern religions. They don't question the accounts of Jesus, but prefer to add to them or to reinterpret them. This group is very different from the other 2, because even though they treat him with respect, the Jesus they respect is just one of the many spiritual figures they have. And then there's the 4th group. This group says that Jesus never lived, all the accounts about him are false, and want to back up an idea people came up with. First, I'm going to look at the evidence outside of the Bible and then from the Bible. First, we have Tacitus. He was a very reliable historian of his time and was born 20 years after Jesus died. He wrote about the persecution of Christians and that the founder of this name, Christus, had been executed by Pilate. Then there's Josephus, a writer and a Jew who was born 40 years after Jesus died. He talked about James as the brother of Jesus and said that James was stoned to death by the orders of one of the high priests. He also talked about Jesus in one of his books called The Antiquities of the Jews, saying that Jesus was a good man, had done wonders, had gotten followers from Judaism and outside it, and had been crucified by Pilate. Then you have the Jewish Talmud, a collection of discussions and wise sayings of the rabbis from the 4th century. In these collections, there are references to Jesus that confirm his historical existence. Serapion was a Stoic philosopher from Syria, and he clearly referenced Jesus in his writings. Then you have Celsus, who was a Roman philosopher around 178 AD. He completely disagreed with the Christian faith and gave his own spin on the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. But he never questioned if Jesus ever lived. Then you have Lucian of Samosata, who was a 2nd century Greek and ridiculed the Christians and Jesus, but he never denied or questioned his existence. Guys, there's so much more evidence outside of the Bible, but I really don't want to go over time. But just so you know that there is more evidence, and I'm not just saying that, in 2001, the BBC showed a documentary series called The Son of God, which had over 20 academic teachers, historians, scholars, which a lot weren't even Christians. They were mainly Jewish. But in that documentary, they showed a lot of historical and archaeological evidence of the existence of Jesus. Now, from the Bible, we have the eyewitnesses' accounts of Jesus's life, the first 4 books of the New Testament, which make up the Gospels. In these books, you're going to find the way in which Jesus was born, how he lived, the miracles he did, the parables he used to explain things, how he died, and how he resurrected. The 4 books are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they're named after the authors themselves. Matthew and John were disciples of Jesus, but before they were disciples, Matthew was a tax collector and John was a fisherman. These books are first-hand accounts of Jesus' life because the disciples lived, ate, and travelled with Jesus wherever he went. Mark and Luke, however, used eyewitnesses' accounts, traditions, and other records to write their books. Mark was, let's say, a co-worker of Peter, who was a disciple of Jesus, and of Paul, someone who used to persecute and kill Christians, but then became a Christian himself. And Luke was a physician. If you want me to go into the reliability of the Gospels and how you can truly trust them, then that's for a completely different video. But the same weight that is given to the accounts of Jesus from outside of the Bible should be given to the accounts of Jesus from the Bible. Because in the end, they all claim to depict one part of history, and there's nothing to argue that they aren't just doing that. Also, even if an account of history doesn't follow the modern practices of our biographies, it would be kind of a cultural arrogance to say that our standard is the only right one, and if they don't write our way, then we won't take them seriously. So yeah, Jesus was a real person, and to say that he never lived, you would need a lot of faith to think that all these different people could come up with such a thing. I would say you would need more faith to believe that he didn't exist than he did. But then comes another question. If Jesus was a real person and he lived here on this earth, then did he really die?